What if I told you that the ancient world's most disciplined minds, the philosophers who built mental fortresses that could withstand any storm, developed 8 specific daily habits that could silence every distraction, overcome every temptation, and build the kind of unshakable discipline that makes you essentially unstoppable? What if these same habits, practiced over 2,000 years ago by emperors and slaves alike, could give you the mental clarity and self-control that seem impossible? In our modern world of endless noise and constant distraction, right now as you're watching this, your mind is probably scattered across dozens of concerns. You're thinking about work while scrolling social media, planning tomorrow while avoiding today's responsibilities, feeling overwhelmed by information while starving for wisdom. You're surrounded by more noise than any generation in human history, yet you're desperately seeking the silence that comes from true inner discipline. You want to focus, but everything demands your attention. You want to be consistent, but every day brings new distractions. You want to build discipline, but the modern world seems designed to destroy it. This isn't your fault, but it is your responsibility to change it. Because every day you spend at the mercy of external distractions is another day you remain weak, reactive, and ultimately controlled by forces outside yourself. Every moment you allow your attention to be hijacked by notifications, news cycles, social media feeds, and other people's urgencies is a moment you're not building the internal strength that could make you genuinely free. We live in what the Stoics would have recognized as the perfect storm for weak minds. We're bombarded with more information in a single day than ancient philosophers encountered in entire lifetimes. We're expected to maintain constant availability while somehow developing deep focus. We're told to follow our feelings while building rational discipline. We're encouraged to seek external validation while developing internal strength. These contradictions aren't accidental. They're the natural result of a culture that profits from distraction, confusion, and weak willpower. The ancient Stoics faced their own versions of these challenges. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most complex empire in history while maintaining inner peace through daily philosophical practice. He dealt with wars, plagues, political intrigue, and the constant demands of absolute power, yet he developed the discipline to write some of history's most profound philosophical insights. He didn't achieve this through willpower alone, but through specific daily habits that trained his mind like a muscle. Epictetus transformed from a physically broken slave to one of history's most influential teachers by developing habits that made his mind unbreakable even when his body was chained. He understood that external freedom means nothing without internal discipline, and that internal discipline comes only through consistent daily practices that strengthen your ability to choose your response to any circumstance. Seneca balanced enormous wealth and political responsibility with philosophical wisdom by creating daily routines that kept him grounded in what truly mattered. He knew that without disciplined habits, even the most well-intentioned person becomes reactive, scattered, and ultimately ineffective. He developed practices that allowed him to remain centered and purposeful regardless of external chaos. These weren't just theoretical concepts. These were practical, battle-tested habits that enabled ordinary human beings to achieve extraordinary discipline, focus, and inner strength. These same 8 habits can transform your relationship with distraction, temptation, and mental weakness, but only if you're willing to implement them with the same commitment that built the greatest minds in human history. If you're serious about mastering true discipline, if you're tired of being controlled by external noise and ready to develop the internal silence that comes from genuine strength, if you recognize that the focus and self-control you're seeking require more than motivation and good intentions, then like this video right now. Don't skip any part because each habit builds on the previous ones, and understanding their interconnection is crucial for developing the kind of discipline that actually lasts. Drop a comment when you recognize the specific noise in your life that's been preventing you from building real discipline, and share this with someone who you know is ready to stop being scattered and start being focused. The first ancient habit that will begin your transformation is the morning reflection ritual. This isn't about positive thinking or gratitude journaling, though both can be valuable. This is about starting each day with a deliberate examination of your priorities, your character, and your commitment to living according to your principles rather than reacting to whatever demands the day brings. Marcus Aurelius began each day by writing in his personal journal, not for publication, but for his own mental discipline. He would remind himself of what he could control and what he couldn't, what virtues he wanted to practice, and what kind of person he intended to be. regardless of what circumstances arose. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own." This wasn't pessimism or negativity. This was preparation. He was mentally rehearsing how to respond to difficult people and situations from his principles rather than from his emotions. He was setting his intention to remain centered regardless of external chaos. He was choosing his character before the day chose his circumstances. Most people start their day by immediately checking their phones, consuming whatever information the algorithms decide to feed them, and allowing other people's priorities to determine their mental state before they've even gotten out of bed. They begin each day reactive instead of proactive, scattered instead of focused, responding to external demands instead of internal commitments. The Stoic morning reflection ritual creates the opposite pattern. You begin each day by connecting with your deepest values, clarifying your most important priorities, and setting your intention to respond to whatever arises from strength rather than weakness, from wisdom rather than impulse, from character rather than circumstance. Here's how you implement this practice immediately. Set your alarm 15 minutes earlier than usual. Before checking any device, before consuming any external information, spend those 15 minutes writing by hand about your intentions for the day. What kind of person do you want to be today? What principles will guide your decisions? What challenges might arise? And how will you respond from your best self rather than your reactive patterns? What really matters most today? And how will you protect that priority from less important but more urgent distractions? This isn't just journaling. This is mental armor construction. You're building the internal foundation that will keep you centered when external forces try to knock you off balance. You're choosing your response patterns before circumstances demand responses. You're programming your mind to operate from intention rather than reaction. The second habit will revolutionize your relationship with discomfort. Voluntary hardship practice. This is perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Stoic discipline, and it's absolutely crucial for developing real strength in a world designed for comfort addiction. Most people organize their entire lives around avoiding discomfort, but this avoidance actually makes them weaker and more dependent on circumstances being perfect for them to function well. The Stoics understood that voluntary exposure to controlled discomfort builds the internal strength to handle involuntary discomfort with grace and power. Seneca, despite being one of the wealthiest men in Rome, would regularly practice voluntary poverty. He would eat simple food, wear basic clothing, and sleep on hard surfaces, not because he was masochistic, but because he was training his mind to be independent of luxury and comfort. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" He understood that most of our suffering comes from the fear of discomfort rather than discomfort itself. By voluntarily experiencing controlled versions of what we fear, we discover that we're much stronger than we thought. Marcus Aurelius practiced this as well, despite having access to every luxury the Roman Empire could provide. He would wake before dawn even when he didn't want to, exercise in harsh weather, and deliberately choose difficulty over ease in situations where he had options. He knew that each small choice to embrace discomfort was building the mental muscle to handle larger challenges with strength and grace. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics understood intuitively. Voluntary exposure to controlled stress literally rewires your brain for greater resilience, confidence, and emotional regulation. When you consistently choose discomfort over comfort in small ways, you're training your nervous system to handle stress more effectively and developing confidence in your ability to handle whatever life presents. But here's what most people get wrong about this practice. They think it means being unnecessarily harsh to yourself or seeking suffering for its own sake. The Stoics weren't masochists. They were strategists. They chose small, voluntary discomforts to avoid being controlled by the fear of larger, involuntary ones. The practical application starts with small daily choices. Take cold showers or end hot showers with 30 seconds of cold water. Walk or bike instead of driving when possible. Eat simple, healthy food instead of constantly choosing based on cravings. Exercise even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. Have difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. Wake up when your alarm goes off instead of hitting snooze. Put your phone away during designated times, even when you want to check it. Each of these small acts of voluntary discomfort builds your internal strength and proves to yourself that you can handle difficulty. They develop what the Stoics called disciplined will, the ability to choose your actions based on what's best for you long-term, rather than what feels good in the moment. The third habit will transform your relationship with time and attention. Single focus meditation. This isn't about emptying your mind or achieving some mystical state. This is about training your attention like a muscle, so that you can direct it where you choose rather than having it scattered by every distraction that appears. Epictetus taught that the ability to focus your attention on one thing at a time is the foundation of all other disciplines. He understood that a scattered mind is a weak mind, and that developing the capacity for sustained focus is essential for any meaningful achievement or genuine peace of mind. Marcus Aurelius practiced what we might call philosophical meditation, spending time each day contemplating specific principles and applying them to his current challenges. He would focus his entire attention on understanding concepts like justice, courage, wisdom, and self-discipline, not as abstract ideas, but as practical guides for specific situations he was facing. In our modern context, this practice is more important than ever. We live in the age of continuous partial attention, where most people never experience true focus for more than a few minutes at a time. We've trained our brains to expect constant stimulation and immediate gratification, which makes sustained attention on anything difficult or important nearly impossible. The Stoic approach to meditation is intensely practical. You choose one specific object of focus, something meaningful and useful, and you train your attention to remain with that object for extended periods. This might be a philosophical principle you want to understand more deeply, a specific virtue you want to develop, or even your breathing as a foundation for other mental training. The key is consistency and gradual progression. Start with 5 minutes of completely focused attention on your chosen object. When your mind wanders, which it will, gently return your attention without judgment or frustration. This isn't about perfection. It's about strengthening your capacity to direct your mental energy where you choose. Here's a specific Stoic meditation practice you can implement today. Choose one of the 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance. Spend 10 minutes thinking deeply about what this virtue means, how it applies to your current challenges, and specific ways you could practice it today. Don't let your mind wander to other topics, problems, or concerns. Keep returning your attention to this single focus. Over time, increase the duration and deepen your focus. The goal isn't to achieve some special state of consciousness. The goal is to develop the mental discipline to sustain attention on what's important, rather than being scattered by what's urgent, entertaining, or emotionally triggering. This practice builds the foundation for all other forms of discipline because it trains your most fundamental capacity, the ability to choose where you place your mental energy. When you can focus completely on one thing at a time, you become exponentially more effective in every area of life. The 4th habit will free you from external dependency: evening self-examination. This practice involves ending each day with an honest assessment of your actions, decisions, and responses, not for self-criticism, but for continuous improvement and character development. Seneca wrote extensively about his evening practice of reviewing his day. He would examine his actions, identify areas where he acted according to his principles, and areas where he fell short, and plan improvements for the following day. This wasn't self-flagellation or perfectionism. This was the disciplined practice of someone committed to continuous growth. He wrote, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine the whole day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. For why should I fear any consequence from my mistakes when I'm able to say, 'Watch out that you don't do it again, but now I forgive you'?" This practice serves multiple purposes. First, it increases self-awareness by helping you notice patterns in your behavior that you might otherwise miss. Second, it reinforces your commitment to your principles by regularly evaluating how well you're living according to them. Third, it identifies specific areas for improvement so you can make targeted changes rather than hoping for vague, general improvement. Marcus Aurelius practiced this as well, though his approach was more philosophical. He would reflect on the day's events through the lens of Stoic principles, asking himself questions like, did I respond to challenges with wisdom or reactivity? Did I focus on what I could control or waste energy on what I couldn't? Did I act with justice and courage? Or did I take the easy path? Most people either avoid self-reflection entirely or engage in it in unhelpful ways. They either refuse to examine their actions honestly, which prevents growth, or they beat themselves up for their mistakes, which prevents learning. The Stoic approach is different. It's honest but not harsh, thorough but not obsessive, focused on improvement but not perfectionism. Here's how you implement this practice immediately. Before going to sleep, spend 10 minutes reviewing your day. Ask yourself these specific questions. What did I do well today? Where did I act according to my principles? Where did I fall short of my standards? What triggered reactive responses instead of thoughtful ones? What can I learn from today's challenges? How can I respond better to similar situations tomorrow? Write down your insights, but keep the tone constructive rather than critical. The goal is to become a more conscious, intentional person, not to punish yourself for being human. Focus on patterns rather than isolated incidents, and on actionable improvements rather than vague self-criticism. This practice gradually builds what the Stoics called wisdom, the ability to learn from experience and apply those lessons to future situations. It also develops emotional regulation by helping you process the day's events thoughtfully rather than carrying unresolved tensions into sleep in the next day. The fifth habit will build unshakable inner strength, premeditation of future challenges. This practice involves mentally rehearsing how you'll respond to likely difficulties before they occur, so you can act from wisdom and preparation rather than surprise and reactivity when challenges actually arise. Marcus Aurelius was a master of this practice. He would regularly imagine potential setbacks, criticisms, betrayals, and obstacles, not to create anxiety, but to prepare his mind to respond with virtue rather than emotion when these situations occurred. He wrote, "Begin each day by telling yourself, 'Today, I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness.'" This wasn't pessimism or negative thinking. This was mental preparation that allowed him to remain centered and respond wisely when difficult people and situations actually appeared. By mentally rehearsing virtuous responses to likely challenges, he was programming his mind to choose strength over reactivity when those challenges became real. Seneca practiced a similar technique, regularly imagining the loss of his wealth, health, position, and loved ones. This wasn't to create sadness or anxiety, but to reduce his psychological dependence on external circumstances and increase his gratitude for what he currently had. He understood that most suffering comes from being unprepared for change and loss, and that mental rehearsal of difficulties builds emotional resilience. This practice works because your brain doesn't distinguish clearly between vividly imagined experiences and real ones when it comes to building neural pathways. When you mentally rehearse responding to challenges with courage, wisdom, and self-discipline, you're literally training your brain to choose those responses when real challenges arise. Most people do the opposite. They either avoid thinking about potential difficulties, which leaves them unprepared when challenges occur, or they worry obsessively about problems without mentally rehearsing constructive responses, which creates anxiety without building strength. The Stoic approach is strategic and empowering. You acknowledge that difficulties will arise, you imagine specific scenarios that are likely based on your current situation, and you mentally practice responding to those scenarios from your principles rather than your emotions. Here's how you implement this practice today. Identify 3 challenges that are likely to occur in the next week based on your current circumstances. These might be work conflicts, family tensions, health issues, financial pressures, or personal temptations. For each potential challenge, spend 5 minutes imagining yourself responding with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. What would the wisest version of yourself do in that situation? How would someone with unshakable character respond? What would serve the greater good rather than just your immediate preferences? Visualize yourself acting from these higher principles and mentally rehearse the specific words, actions, and attitudes you want to embody. This isn't about trying to control outcomes, which you can't. This is about preparing your mind to respond consciously rather than reactively when difficulties arise. It's about choosing your character before circumstances test your character. The 6th habit will create unbreakable focus, information, diet, and attention protection. This involves deliberately controlling what information you consume and when you consume it, recognizing that your attention is your most valuable resource and should be protected as carefully as your physical health. The ancient Stoics didn't have to deal with social media, news cycles, or constant digital notifications, but they understood the principle clearly. What you regularly put into your mind shapes what comes out of it. Marcus Aurelius was extremely selective about the books he read, the people he spent time with, and the ideas he entertained. He knew that mental discipline requires guarding your inputs as carefully as your outputs. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of choosing your reading material wisely. He believed that consuming too much information, even good information, could scatter the mind and prevent deep understanding. He advocated for reading fewer books more deeply rather than many books superficially, and for choosing sources that would contribute to character development rather than mere entertainment. In our modern context, this principle is absolutely crucial for developing discipline and focus. We're exposed to more information in a single day than the Stoics encountered in months. Most of this information is designed to capture attention rather than contribute to wisdom, to create emotional reactions rather than thoughtful responses, to generate engagement rather than understanding. The result is that most people's minds are scattered, reactive, and constantly seeking stimulation. They can't focus deeply on important tasks because they've trained their brains to expect constant novelty. They can't make thoughtful decisions because they're overwhelmed with too much conflicting information. They can't develop inner peace because they're constantly consuming other people's anxieties, opinions, and dramas. The Stoic approach to information consumption is intentional and strategic. You choose what information serves your growth and character development. You consume it at designated times rather than constantly throughout the day, and you protect your attention from sources that make you weaker, more reactive, or more scattered. Here's how you implement this practice immediately. First, conduct an information audit. For 1 week, track everything you consume: news, social media, podcasts, videos, books, conversations. Notice what information makes you feel stronger, wiser, and more focused, and what information makes you feel anxious, scattered, or reactive. Second, create designated times for information consumption rather than grazing constantly throughout the day. Check news once daily for 15 minutes rather than continuously. Use social media for specific purposes at specific times rather than scrolling mindlessly whenever you feel bored or anxious. Third, prioritize depth over breadth. Choose fewer, higher quality sources that contribute to your understanding and character development rather than consuming everything available. Read books that challenge you to grow rather than just entertaining you. Listen to conversations that make you think rather than just confirming what you already believe. Fourth, protect your most focused hours. Don't check email, news, or social media first thing in the morning or during your most productive work periods. Use your peak mental energy for your most important activities rather than other people's priorities and agendas. This practice gradually trains your mind to sustain focus on what matters most, rather than being scattered by what's most immediate or emotionally triggering. It builds what the Stoics called discrimination, the ability to distinguish between what deserves your attention and what doesn't. The seventh habit will develop emotional mastery, response gap training. This involves deliberately creating space between stimulus and response so you can choose your actions from wisdom rather than impulse, from principles rather than emotions, from your best self rather than your reactive patterns. Epictetus taught that between every stimulus and response there's a gap, and in that gap lies your freedom. Most people react immediately and automatically to whatever happens to them, but this reactive living keeps them weak and at the mercy of circumstances. The disciplined person learns to pause in that gap and choose their response based on what serves their long-term development rather than their short-term impulses. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly in his role as emperor. He would receive news of military defeats, political betrayals, and personal attacks, but rather than responding immediately from anger or disappointment, he would pause, consider what response would serve justice and the common good, and then act from that considered position. This practice is especially crucial in our modern world of instant communication and social media, where immediate reactions are expected and rewarded. Most people respond to emails within minutes, react to social media posts instantly, and make decisions based on their first emotional impulse. This creates a life of constant reactivity where you're controlled by whatever stimulus appears rather than guided by your deeper principles. Response gap training involves deliberately inserting pause between trigger and action. When someone sends you an irritating email, you don't respond immediately. When you feel angry, frustrated, or anxious, you don't act on that feeling right away. When you want something immediately, you pause and consider whether that want aligns with your long-term goals and values. The key is to use the pause productively. This isn't about procrastination or avoidance. It's about creating space to connect with your deeper wisdom and respond from your principles rather than your impulses. Here's how you develop this crucial skill. Start with small triggers and gradually work up to larger ones. When you feel the urge to check your phone, pause for 30 seconds and ask yourself, what would serve me better right now than consuming information? When someone says something that irritates you, take 3 deep breaths before responding and ask, what response would reflect my best self? For bigger triggers, extend the pause. Before responding to challenging emails, wait at least an hour and consider, what outcome do I actually want here? And what response is most likely to create that outcome? Before making important decisions when you're emotional, wait 24 hours and revisit the choice when you're calmer and clearer. This practice gradually develops what the Stoics called temperance, the ability to moderate your responses and choose actions that serve your long-term flourishing rather than your immediate impulses. It builds emotional regulation and wise decision-making skills that compound over time to create genuine inner strength. The 8th and final habit synthesizes all the others: daily principle integration. This involves consciously connecting your daily actions to your deeper values and principles, ensuring that your choices align with your character goals rather than just your immediate preferences or external pressures. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of the principles that guided his decisions as emperor: justice, wisdom, courage, and self-discipline. He didn't just know these principles intellectually, he actively worked to embody them in specific situations throughout each day. He would ask himself, how can I act with justice in this meeting? What would courage look like in this difficult conversation? How can I respond with wisdom rather than reactivity to this challenge? Seneca practiced this by regularly connecting his business decisions, social interactions, and personal choices to his philosophical commitments. He understood that principles without practice are just intellectual concepts, while practices without principles are just habits. The integration of both creates character that can withstand any pressure. Most people live compartmentalized lives where their stated values have little connection to their daily actions. They say they value health, but make choices that undermine it. They claim to prioritize relationships, but spend their time and attention elsewhere. They believe in integrity, but compromise it when convenient. This disconnect creates internal conflict and weak character. The Stoic approach is integrative and holistic. Your principles aren't abstract ideals you hope to embody someday. They're practical guides that inform every choice you make, every word you speak, and every action you take throughout the day. Here's how you implement this practice immediately. Choose 3 core principles that you want to guide your life. These might be honesty, compassion, excellence, justice, courage, or any other values that resonate deeply with your authentic self. Write them down and keep them visible throughout the day. Before making any significant decision, ask yourself, how can this choice reflect my core principles? What would someone committed to these values do in this situation? How can I use this moment to strengthen my character rather than just achieve my immediate goals? At the end of each day, review how well you integrated your principles into your actions. Where did you successfully embody your values? Where did you compromise them for convenience, comfort, or external pressure? What specific situations challenged your commitment to your principles, and how can you respond better next time? This practice gradually aligns your actions with your deepest values, creating what the Stoics called integrity, the integration of belief and behavior, principle and practice, character and conduct. It builds authentic strength that comes from knowing who you are and consistently acting from that knowledge, regardless of external circumstances. These 8 habits work synergistically to create the kind of discipline and inner silence that the ancient Stoics cultivated. The morning reflection sets your intention and priorities. Voluntary hardship builds your capacity to handle difficulty. Single-focus meditation trains your attention. Evening self-examination promotes continuous improvement. Premeditation prepares you for challenges. Information diet protects your mental clarity. Response gap training develops emotional regulation. Daily principle integration aligns your actions with your values. Together, these practices create a comprehensive system for developing genuine discipline. Not the rigid, joyless control that most people associate with the word, but the joyful strength that comes from being guided by wisdom rather than controlled by impulse, from choosing your responses rather than being reactive, from living intentionally rather than accidentally. The transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it begins immediately. The moment you start implementing these practices, you begin to experience more focus, more emotional stability, more purposeful action, and the kind of inner silence that comes from knowing who you are and what matters most to you. Remember, discipline isn't about perfection. It's about direction. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about learning from mistakes and making better choices going forward. It's not about controlling outcomes. It's about controlling your effort, your attention, and your character development. The ancient Stoics understood that external noise is just a symptom of internal chaos, and that true silence comes not from perfect conditions, but from disciplined minds. They knew that the strength to handle any storm comes from daily practices that build inner resilience rather than depending on circumstances to remain calm. If this ancient wisdom resonated with you, if you recognize that the discipline and focus you're seeking require more than motivation and good intentions, if you're ready to implement practical habits that have been tested by time and proven to create genuine strength, then like this video right now and comment below with the habit that speaks to you most powerfully. Share this with someone who you know is ready to stop being scattered and start being focused. Subscribe to join our community of people who are committed to building the inner strength that makes external challenges manageable. Remember, discipline is not a punishment. Discipline is freedom. The question isn't whether you'll face challenges and distractions. The question is whether you'll meet them with the strength that comes from disciplined daily practice, or allow them to control your attention, emotions, and actions. The Stoics chose discipline, and so can you.